for making the time to chat all things Econia and Aptos. Before we start, am I pronouncing it right? Econia?
Econia. It is a portmanteau of the words economy and protopia.
Nice. Okay, I'm glad actually that we covered that because I was wondering the origin of the name. Okay, go ahead.
Aptos seems to have its own kind of confusions at times. I know that
Aptos.
people say Aptos or Aptos,
Yeah.
and they have the same issue of it's the A versus the O, and Econia has the same thing. Econia versus Econia, Aptos versus Aptos. So for both cases, it's A, Econia, Aptos.
So you are the co-founder, CEO of Econia Labs, and you've been close to the core team for a while, but it'd be great to kind of hear your background, how you got involved with blockchains, specifically Aptos, and why you started Econia.
Yeah, thanks for teaming me up there. So my name's Alex, and I'm co-founder, CEO of Econia Labs. I got into crypto initially through just interest in new technology, some trading here and there. But before crypto, I was an aerospace systems engineer. So both of my degrees are in mechanical engineering, most recently from Stanford University, which is in Palo Alto, actually pretty close to where Aptos Labs is based. I studied mechatronic design. I wrote assembly code, very low level systems code, almost like computer, like a CPU language rather than the more abstracted things people are used to in front ends. And after I graduated from school, I worked at Garmin. I was an aerospace engineer. I worked on navigation algorithms for airplanes, particularly those with high software design assurance. So mission critical software that computes the heading, pitch, and the roll of the plane. So if that software fails, the plane goes down. And it trained me on a sort of paranoid mindset kind of programming that I find every day translates into programming smart contracts. And on Aptos, we call them move packages. I initially got started with crypto, and my interest in the more high performance side of things began actually with Solana, in particular the Serum project, which is now defunct in some sense. It's been replaced by OpenBook. Right, which is a community fork. And then also there's now Phoenix trading on Solana.
Yeah.
But at the time, as I started learning more about the protocol, which initially captured my attention, it was bringing traditional finance, one of the pillars of traditional finance, the order book onchain in a real way. I started to find some technical limitations. And these were ultimately imposed by the Solana runtime, not necessarily just by a blockchain computing environment in general.
Yeah.
One thing in particular was this thing called the crank, and it essentially fragmented transaction settlement. So there were no atomic trades in Serum. Everything got put into a queue, and then someone would come along later and turn the queue or turn the crank, push everything out of the queue, and the trades would settle. And Solana, nevertheless, was a maverick in the industry because it instilled, I think, across the industry this notion of parallelism and concurrent computing. In particular, on a monolithic L1, they said, this is going to be the end-all be-all state machine. Shove everything in here. Let's make it run as fast as we can. And I think Aptos has improved on that model. When I learned about Aptos and the block STM model, I was immediately hooked. And my intuition at the time, which was over 2 years ago at this point, just over 2 years, was, well, if anyone can build a scalable distributed system, it's Facebook engineers. And that was left curve thinking, I guess you could say. But 2 years later, that intuition was proved largely correct. And I think that maybe it turned at some point into right curve thinking.
Yeah.
I attended the inaugural pre-mainnet hackathon in May of 2022, where I presented on a rudimentary sort of primitive version of what would become the Econia protocol. My co-founder Kirsten also was there. She presented on a separate project. And after the order book project won a prize, we talked to some folks at Aptos Labs. They were running an accelerator program. Kirsten and I decided to team up. We have very complementary skill sets. Her background is in product design. She does a lot of the front end work for Kahn, all the branding. Nice. She's the master of operations. So having worked in hard consumer goods before, so we got together. We worked in the Aptos Labs office for about 6 months as part of their accelerator program, and we're both first-time founders. So neither of us had exited companies before. We really couldn't pay ourselves until we did the fundraise. And we lived in a 14-person hostel in Palo Alto for 6 months. And it was a total slog. But I suppose we earned our stripes. And so
definitely.
And so that was the origin story, I guess I could say, of Econia Labs. We did the fundraise that eventually we closed Last year it was 6.5 million, led by Dragonfly.
Yeah.
Larger checks included Lightspeed Faction, as well as Wintermute, Hudson River Trading, Flow Traders were some of the biggest names on there. And
Okay.
we've been building since. And I can get into that later, but there's, I think, the sort of long-winded origin story of myself and Econia Labs.
No, thanks. That's super interesting and some great context around your sort of origin and how you slogged it out, and which I think, as you say, well deserved on the stripes. Everyone's got to go through it in some way. The one thing. So back to sort of the serum piece, and maybe going into the weeds. I saw you guys reference sort of hyper parallelized atomic order book, and I know the one thing that caught my attention was really being able to clear USDC transactions differently to Solana, right? My understanding of Solana is that you need to, for a USDC transaction to clear across different dexes, it's actually an account lock, right? Because you need to touch that mint account and it locks out the transaction. You can't actually parallelize and process two USDC transactions at once, right? And my understanding is that Aptos is different in that way. Maybe just give us some color around that.
Yeah, so there are, I think, multiple levels to the concurrency, and I'm glad to jump right into it if that's what the audience is here for. I love getting into the weeds on this stuff. So there's two levels, and I think one level is if we just want to talk about bare transfers. So on Aptos, if Alice wants to send coins to Bob at the same time that CAD wants to send coins to D, they can execute in parallel. So that transaction can operate concurrently because the write sets are on different accounts and different regions of memory.
Yeah.
If you want to go one level deeper of what is possible in terms of parallelism, as far as concurrency in the industry goes, there is the additional problem of Alice sending money to B while CAD sends money to B. That is still serialized because you're trying to increment the same counter at B's account, the recipient, because both people are trying to send money. Yeah. Aptos actually is working on a form of concurrency for this. I've contributed on that PR. It's known as concurrent balances for fungible asset transfers. And this means that you can actually send and receive from the same account concurrently. It makes use of a novel primitive called aggregators. And these are essentially counters that allow summations and decrements to the same global resource concurrently. And this is, in my opinion, straight up dark magic. The George Minkoff, the research engineer who worked on it, gave a presentation at the Palo Alto Aptos Ecosystem Summit earlier this year. I don't know if that's floating around, but aggregators are useful in Aptos for, again, operations where you can sum and decrement, and those can operate in parallel even to the same region of memory, which is sort of unheard of in database theory. If you want to, write to the same row in a Postgres table, that has to be serial. But this is there's a new form, and it's specifically for simple arithmetic addition and subtraction. I would like to see multiplication and division, and I suspect that will be coming down the pipeline. So that's the first level, is that Aptos Labs is already innovating in pretty fundamental database architecture in the sense that you can now concurrently add and subtract from the same amount. It basically throws an exception if it would underflow or overflow, but you can still have that exception operate in parallel. So that's one level. And then the second level is at the order book implementation level. So right now in Econia, it uses the traditional coin method, which is it's because the concurrent addition and subtraction is still in the works. It's useful for some things, not implemented at the coin level. So that at the order book level, there is this assumption that additions and decrements to the same account have to be serialized. But if we do it across multiple accounts, those can operate concurrently. So it's basically you get the best you can get already from Postgres or some other standard DB in Econia. And I think one of the interesting parts about order book design is it's basically a giant list of addresses. So you have a list of who has how much and how much they're willing to sell it at, and the matching engine just steps through top to bottom, says who's next in line, and it matches assets between them. And the problem with trying to implement a model like this on Solana, where it uses static concurrency, is that the addresses have to be pre-declared ahead of time. And this is because you don't know who you will match against until you've actually run the matching engine and stepped through every order. And so theoretically, any order could eat through every price level on the book, could chew through every order, match every person. It eats up all the buy side or sell side liquidity, and then the transaction sells. However, if this is the case, that transaction will result in writes to every single one of those addresses on the order book.
Yeah.
And the problem is that Solana forces developers to declare address dependencies up front, and there's a limit on how many addresses you can establish. So Solana implements this, or it doesn't implement, it enforces a trade-off between atomic settlement and permissionless market making. And this is because if you have, in a theoretically infinite number of addresses, say it's just one more address than the number that can fit in a Solana transaction header. If it's at that point, then you have to break up transaction matching into two, or you have to break up matching into two transactions. One transaction to evaluate what the headers will be on the next transaction, and then the next transaction to actually apply those headers and then proceed with the matching process. You can get around that if you limit the number of addresses that are on the order book via permissioned market making. So if you constrain the number of addresses that can be that can participate in limit orders, who can place limit orders on the order book, then you don't face that issue, because again, the address headers only have to declare the number that are permissioned, and you can enforce in your contract code that the permission list is less than the maximum header count. So that's the trade-off essentially that Solana and more generally static parallelism enforces. There's a limit to how many addresses you can write lock. If you gave people the ability to write lock every address in global state, then you've just put in a dot. You've just opened up the biggest DOS mitigant for your parallel one that you could possibly open up. So enter block STM, which uses optimistic concurrency, also known as dynamic parallelism. So developers in block STM do not have to declare any state upfront. They can just call functions, and kind of like in C, which is actually one of my past programming languages, it just goes and grabs that memory and operates on it. So there's essentially pointers that are stored in memory. You follow those pointers, you go get the state, you operate on that state, and you put it back. And in block STM, it uses this clever mechanism of evaluating those access lists dynamically during runtime. And it puts the transactions in a commitment set queue. So the executor for the parallel execution engine says, okay, I simulate this transaction and I evaluate all of the memory region updates it uses a multi-version hash map. And then it runs other transactions on separate threads at the same time. And then once those have been executed, it compares the write sets and says, okay, do any of these touch the same state? And if they do, replay the later one. So this is how it avoids these problems of modifying the same state from two concurrent transactions in a kind of race condition. And there are tricks that can be done at the executor level, like aggregators, as I mentioned earlier, where I could say, okay. Typically, if two things touch the same region, force one to live through another. It's called an incarnation, carnation in block STM. So replay it. But if the only collision is an aggregator, then do some black magic with the aggregator, and they can still both clear at the same time. So you can add in little optimizations at the executor level, and this is why I'm so excited about Aptos, is that again, it's vertically integrated. All of these things in the tech stack are built to rail performance to the extreme, to provide unparalleled security and intuition in the programming process. And again, this is just one example of the block STM. So in Econia, essentially, an order book uses that property of block STM, the dynamic evaluation of addresses, to essentially just evaluate them at runtime. The matching engine goes in, it says, okay, who's matching on this market, and it transfers the assets in between them, and then the transaction settles. Anyone can place a limit order, and markets can clear in parallel. So while I said earlier that block STM doesn't force developers to declare any state up front, it does open up the window with appropriate program design to leverage that maximum concurrency. So Econia isolates the state for every market into an independent channel. So this means that trades on one market clear in parallel to another market, and they're both permissioned, they are both atomic settlement, and then they never collide at the state access level.
Okay. I mean, I love Solana, but for me, when you hear that, it really does sound like a serious upgrade to parallelism, and that's all to block STM and this optimistic sort of parallel way of doing things. So I agree with you, and that really does make me quite interested in Aptos and kind of why I've got kind of Aptos pilled for lack of a better word. Just on the actual lane. So I know Solana's got issues with the scheduler at the moment, and from my understanding, there's only 4 sort of lanes that Solana has to actually parallelize transactions. I mean, granted, they could increase that in the future. Is there similar restriction in Aptos at the moment? Are they looking at how many threads effectively are they looking at when they're doing that?
Yeah, so I recall from a lot of Anatoly Yakovenko's earlier talks that Solana was designed with the expectation that threads would run on GPU cores. And it
Okay.
turns out that they kind of, I think, default mostly to CPU cores in
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
Contrast that with Aptos, which is designed to use CPU cores from the beginning. It's optimized for those. There's no expectation of, I don't know, in my opinion, fitting like a square peg into a round hole by getting Turing complete complex code to run on a GPU core.
Yeah.
Those are often more optimized for just like linear algebra sorts of operations. But on Aptos, you can actually read the original block STM paper. This was benchmarked on just a single machine, so it's testing just the executor pipeline of the whole transaction commitment process. But that was running on 32 cores, and it hit 160K TPS, and so that the lanes in that case was 32. I'd have to
Okay.
check what the current nodes specs are for Aptos, but they're constantly setting like higher and higher performance standards, and the nodes
Yeah.
are very quick to upgrade. Everyone who's operating nodes and validators essentially is keen to make sure that they can breadline performance. So
Yeah.
the thread count is not necessarily a limitation of block STM so much as what is like general across the nodes and who can keep up and what kind of bar is the
Set.
committee essentially willing to set
Got
for
it.
everyone within it to meet.
We recently fired up our validator, so I think the current recommendation is 32 cores, 64 thread CPUs, and sort of 64/128 gigs of RAM. But anyway, that's aside. The other thing that I picked up when I was looking through your guys' your docs and whatnot was something around sort of the true peer-to-peer nature of the transactions. So it sounded I may have misunderstood it, but it sounded like you almost custody your assets while you've got an order logged on Econia, and then it clears in some fashion. While in traditional, sort of compared to Solana, we can, since we've done it a few times, we can do it again. You would have to transfer to an account controlled by the DEX in some form or the other for it to actually have control over those assets to clear for you.
It's a pretty typical strategy in a DEX to use a pool, a vault, some kind of centralized escrow.
Yeah.
And Econia uses user-specific escrow, so it's called a market account. And for concurrency, every user has a separate market account for each market they participate on. They can even have a sub-account for if they want to delegate custody, for example, to a margin trading protocol. So that margin trading protocol can, withdraw collateral when needed. And that market account only holds the 2 assets for that market. And again, this is an optimization to make use of the parallel state channels for each market. So if a user has USDC on one market and USDC on another market, you wouldn't want those settling both to their wallet, because a market maker could then theoretically force serial execution across 2 markets by their wallet being the state contention. And so that's why we've added the individual user like escrow market account to it. And the matching engine in Econia looks in the order book state, it checks the market account for each user, and then it like swaps right between the 2 market accounts. So the user has those assets under it's called a move resource, a data structure basically that is owned by their account. And then they can deposit their collateral and withdraw it out of there. And then when they place a limit order on the book, it changes a field called like base or quote available. And it essentially just locks it and says, even though you have these coins in your account, you cannot withdraw them until you cancel the limit order that is corresponding to them. So it is a peer-to-peer like settlement in that the assets are held under each user's market account, and then they're routed between rather than going to a central vault.
Got it. Okay. Coming out a little bit from the weeds, and maybe more to your sort of entrepreneurial journey, ups and downs to date, maybe a little color on the raise. I mean, Dragonfly, you got some great investors on the cap table. That process must have been a little bit grueling to raise, but just your journey to date. So.
Yeah, Dragonfly has been exceptionally helpful. Lightspeed Faction as well. They've been in the industry for a while, and as larger VCs, they've got the kinds of resources that can really help out workers in targeted, directed ways, and we make use of those. So definitely glad to collaborate with them and geek out on mechanism design here and there sometimes internally. The fundraise, I think that I don't know if fundraising is really ever easy unless
It's not,
a founder. Yeah, so I mean, I think we went through a lot of the typical challenges. Some of them being that like there's not. This isn't the kind of thing that even if you went and got an MBA, you would necessarily be prepared for. And so like you kind of just have to dive right into it, which we did. And Aptos Labs, again, we were living in Palo Alto in the 42-person hostel, working out of Aptos Labs, which is 10 minutes down the street. And we had contacts there, HC in particular of Aptos Labs, who helped coach us on the the fundraising side of things, getting together the pitch decks, figuring out what was important to go in there, some of the conversations to have. I think that I don't think we ever really turned down a call from anyone who was interested. And I think the timing was really right for us because Aptos was pre-launch. There was a lot of interest in it across the industry. Yeah. And I think that we definitely capitalized on that at the right time. Obviously, with the kerfuffle of the FTX collapse and all of the debt spirals that unraveled around that time, that wasn't helpful. But that all kind of happened. Like the FTX collapse, I think, happened just after we got the first like 2 or 3 big checks in the door, and then it was just lining up the other people who were follow-ons after that. So timing was really superb, and it's been outstanding to be able to just focus on product and not have to, think about the immediate next fundraise because, runway is too short. So obviously there's the business kind of and startup considerations and we try to be, prudent when we can. But really, I think it's just great to have tech forward partners on the cap table who want us to be heads down building like we have been.
Yeah. You touched on sort of Aptos' launch. I know at the time I was paying a little bit of attention. I was quite involved with the Solana ecosystem. The one thing I saw quite active was sort of the NFT community and launches around new NFTs. That got a lot of color from Aptos, but DeFi, there wasn't all that much going on. Maybe you could share sort of a 0 to 100 on Aptos DeFi ecosystem evolution since launch and how it is today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the cool part is that a lot of the products and teams that were launching earlier on, they kind of had to just focus and be heads down and get their core offering out. And it's now at the point where people are starting to incubate and cross-pollinate and compose with each other, which is exciting for us. So we launched the Econia protocol with a consortium of other front ends. So Econia is a back end. And there were 4 front end partners who launched at the same time in November of last year. And so we're starting right now to field internally the second wave of integration. So someone's working on a perps DEX platform on top of Econia. We're working with another project who's doing something else and looking into margins, bot trading. We also recently put out a reference trading front end that people can fork and use to build their own dApps on top of Econia. So I think that's exciting to see. And now that there are the kind of base primitives like liquid staking, borrow lend, you can start to chain all these things together. And what's exciting for me is to see new things that haven't been done before. I think every DeFi ecosystem needs a Uniswap V2 style constant product AMM. You need that. You need a borrow lend pool. And from there, maybe a perp dex, and then it's kind of off to the races. But now there's more interesting and novel things coming out. People have been talking to us about structured products on top of Econia and more exotic use cases. So I'm excited to see it take off. And I think what's cool too is that there's so much organic developer growth and its interest in the ecosystem, because at least for my own, in person visits to a lot of the Aptos events that have been happening, whether it was just last week or the week before in Hong Kong or Palo Alto a few months earlier in the year, there's always new projects. And one of the most consistent things I hear is that Move clicked for me. And immediately I was Aptos pilled, especially the people who've written smart contracts before. There's not these same things with reentrancy issues. There's not the like painful, maybe account model or serialization things that have to happen on Solana. You just write intuitive blockchain code, and if you've worked on a blockchain before, Move just makes sense. It can be unintuitive to some people, like if you come from a FANG company and you just want to get into crypto, you have to unlearn a decent amount.
Yeah.
But if you already understand like how state access works and what you may or may not want to do in a blockchain programming environment, Move is perfect for it. And that's what initially like helped really sell me on it. As terms of stickiness of a developer uptake, because I initially, again, like I came to Aptos and because I saw that this was a web scale system, and Move was kind of means to an end. Move is designed to allow you to extract everything you can out of that web scale system. That doesn't mean I also just generally like Move and it's fun programming. I mean, it's definitely like top flow state for me is writing Move packages. And I know too that other developers, that's like a lot of the things that keep them around, because they could go write a new Solidity contract on the hottest new L3 or whatever. Yeah. But there's definitely something new in Aptos, and I think the Move programming language is certainly here to stay. That's why we've seen things like Move L2s, or I remember there was some discussion, at least as I could see kind of from the outside with Solana forums and community about maybe do we include this in like C level somehow, and I think people have
still pushing that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, cool. Right. So Move is definitely here to stay. And I think what's exciting is to be on the chain that Move is built for from the ground up. Yeah. Again, like when you go from like consensus level, you go to the local DB IO, or the way that the executor works, like this is all totally vertically integrated. Move is a part of that. It provides things like safe resource access, etc. But this is all tied together in a very like well coordinated package and tech stack that is designed for just sheer performance. So it's really exciting to be building on it and to see all the other developers who are paying attention to that nowadays.
No, thanks. That's super good color. Just on the reference front end. So, I mean, my understanding, you kind of push that to kind of get a lot more front ends and a lot more, easy for hackathons or whatever guys to just spin out a front end that can use sort of Econia in the back. How does the fee model work? Are you guys taking a fee for usage on that front end, or where do you guys actually make the money?
So right now, Econia is designed to kick back all the taker fees essentially on a trade to the so-called integrator. So when someone runs a front end, they can just pass their integrator address in, and then they can collect, like 5 bips on that trade. We are working right now on a couple like upgrades, etc., to Econia, and including the capacity for maybe like a global just protocol fee, that kind of thing, and also want to make sure at the same time that we can balance the incentives that help people on board, because essentially people who are running traffic through Econia are getting paid for order flow in some sense. So they do the marketing, they create the front end, they bring in all these users, and then they can take commission on the trade. And this is a model that we appreciate because it puts Econia in the fundamental level of DeFi, and we really have sought out to build a liquidity layer. And so that doesn't just mean that Econia Labs builds and hosts a trading front end. It means that Econia Labs empowers other protocols to compose on top and to build whatever they want, not just APT spot trading, but to build margining, perps, and anything like that, and to use Econia, the core matching engine, the liquidity venue as the core product offering. And obviously, as time goes on, we want to make sure that the governance of this is as decentralized as possible. So that does include, probably at some point, maybe a token. Like obviously, we want to look into all the different ways that governance is possible, and typically, a token is the way to decentralize that and to make sure that the governance is engaging. And beyond that, we are already taking steps to make sure that the Econia protocol is decentralized as it can be. And so that's why, I'm a community contributor to Aptos Core, including to the
Yeah.
current multi-sig implementation. And Econia is deployed under a community multi-sig. So that means that the front end partners who are running front ends on top of Econia, they also sign off on protocol. Like if Econia Labs builds an upgrade and gets it audited, and we can share that commit, and people say, okay, we want to upgrade this on chain, like 3 of 5 have to sign off it on the committee. And if the incentive parameters are to be changed, things like the fee model, that has to be signed off on a from a community, consortium. And as more protocols integrate, we expect that security set to expand. And so we're trying to take this incremental approach that allows us to help shepherd the protocol into this position of like a public liquidity infrastructure item, while also engaging all the people who are using it.
Okay, that makes sense. I had to look at the different dexes. I mean, the main pair that seems to be traded at the moment now is sort of APT USDC, right? Who, in your mind, obviously, it sounds like you probably want to push that responsibility onto the integrators to kind of add the new pairs, right? Or do you guys see that in your sort of bucket to kind of push for the next while?
So APT USDC is certainly the top pair on Econia. It commands most of the volume, and because there are institutional grade market makers who are integrated with the protocol who are quoting tight, and because it's so capital efficient, Econia often can take pretty much every trade from an aggregator, and so that's why the volumes are so high, is because people don't need to lock up all this TVL and spread that liquidity thin from price range 0 to infinity. They can place a discrete like points liquidity at one point. And so it takes a lot of that volume. Wrapped Ether is also trading on the DEX, and market registration is permissionless on Econia. Yeah. So anyone can register market. There's, I can't, the Econia Labs can't really stop anyone from doing it. And other people have registered other markets. I think the main question is in an environment where there is an order book, what does the liquidity profile look like? So just because a market is there doesn't mean that there's always a limit order there, or that there's someone who's actively managing inventory and bids and asks on the book. Institutional market makers have done that on the APT and Ether price because they know there's that activity. And so we just want to make it as easy as possible for other folks to help to get their products off the ground. And so if they launch a token, for example, making sure that maybe they want to have a connection to a market maker who can provide liquidity on the DEX because they can't afford the $2 million Binance exchange fee, or whatever it is, and so often it really is just the case that there is a means for providing liquidity, and luckily the transaction fees on Econia are so low, it's 0.02 of a cent to place a limit order or cancel a limit order. And so this does open up basically like HFT strategies or the kinds of market making operations you'd see on centralized exchanges, but just fully on chain. And so we're also looking internally right now in a kind of fun consumer product offering, as well as this plays into like longer term research and development. How can we incorporate traditional like constant product curves or concentrated liquidity curves and create an auxiliary mechanism for liquidity provisioning in the case that maybe a market isn't blue chip status yet, but it's on its way. And so some kind of internal hybrid, we think is an appropriate method as long as it doesn't sacrifice the order book performance. So we've taken note of a lot of these trends in the market, and essentially like we want to build a protocol where the liquidity is the product. And so when there's a blue chip market, and an evolving ecosystem, that obviously is going to be kind of self-perpetuated just by limit orders. But in other cases, it might be appropriate to include some kind of, less active for liquidity provisioning techniques. And we're looking into all of those right now.
That brings me on to the next one, because meme coins on Aptos. I mean, I know there are a couple of Shrimp and Gui, whatever, a couple of others, but it would be great to see them on Econia, right? So what do you think unlocking them with some sort of pooled liquidity would enable that kind of activity?
Yeah, I think that there's certainly a room for pooled liquidity, especially for newer markets in terms of bootstrapping. Like I said, we're working on, kind of consumer-facing product right now that is us dipping our fingers into some other things, and also plays into research and development longer term. So we're looking forward to that, and want to make sure that anyone can get liquidity from like stage one, which is like I just deployed my contract, to stage three, which is people just like this so much that they want to place limit orders and market make it for themselves. And so there's like the question of how do you get in between those realms, and where are the hops and where are the pain points that we're looking to solve in a pragmatic approach, longer term.
It'd be great to have another venue that they can deploy 10,000 meme coins a day. That'd be great.
Yeah, people love the memes.
Touching on sort of real world assets, maybe starting with a prediction, what do you think will be the first TradFi market to trade on Econia?
Yeah, I think that in terms of real world assets, what I'm most excited about is actually Forex markets and bringing them on chain, which I think is made possible through stablecoins. So they already exist. And I think countries around the world are taking note that USDC and Tether predominantly were actually a really great way for the US to even further extend the reach of the dollar. And so I think that a lot of leading nations are going to be left in the dust if they cannot also bring their sovereign currency on chain. And one of the, I think, really exciting aspects about stablecoins and non-USD stablecoins is that unlike other real world assets, commodities, equities, you don't have the same kind of like exchange or environment specific constraints. So if someone's trading corn, then depending on how they're trading it and where they're trading it, they might need to prove that they can take delivery of literally tons of corn. And I think this has happened before, where spec trading offices in Wall Street have had trucks show up with barrels of oil because they didn't close their whatever soon enough, and it just showed up because that's what happens. And so there's the deliverability thing in equities. There's often governance rights associated with it. Dividends, is an airdrop, like that's kind of tricky. I think we'll see that play out. And again, it's like venue specific. So a lot of times national securities exchanges can like prohibit who can participate. Currency, like sovereign currency, is kind of for everyone. I can go to the airport and, if I'm willing to pay 300 bips, I can get whatever currency I want. And that's accepted, that this is very liquid, and we don't need to be as uptight about who can participate in this. And in terms of the deliverability, contrasted with things like oil or corn or whatever, the mere existence of a stablecoin implies sufficient deliverability in the sense that if it exists because someone has already guaranteed that you can redeem your stablecoin for the fiat. Or you can sell it to someone who will, like in the case of Circle, often it's a business. Maybe an individual can't open up a mint or burn account, but I can sell my USDC to whatever merchant, and they'll go in their account and they'll redeem it. So those markets are liquid enough. And one of the additional exciting aspects about Forex markets is that by definition, it isn't associated with one sovereignty because every pair has two. So there's already this leading question of like, well, where should it settle? And it's like, well, it should settle everywhere and nowhere. And that is the blockchain. So this is the perfect use case for it. I mean, these markets are so fragmented, and you kind of need the trustless environment, because in equities or commodities, like you basically trust that there's this like giant state regulator who will come down with the hammer if something happens. But in Forex markets, it's like, well, what happens if this currency from this other country? It's like, well, you're in my country, you're not in that country, so like go talk to them, But if you settle it on chain and it's just the simple like redeemable fiat, yes or no, this is liquid, I know I can redeem it, that kind of takes care of a lot of those things. And this sort of needs an order book. I mean, again, it is like the pillar of traditional finance. And so I would just like to see these kinds of things take off on chain, on Econia, on Aptos.
I think I might have lost connection a little bit. Being at the bottom tip of Africa, it is pretty dreadful sometimes. We had like it was about a month ago now, we actually had a cable break up in Cote d'Ivoire, and it took out like 4 cables. We've got like 8, but there's only 5 to Europe. So then every ISP is basically scrambling as fast as they can to get access. I mean, it completely knocked off Microsoft Teams for the whole day. So you can imagine every corporate in South Africa was out of luck for that day. But it's what we live in. It's what we live in.
I do think that it's an amazing, we get these reminders every once in a while of how dependent we are on ultimately like brittle IT infrastructure at the international level. Like I saw a picture of a fish chewing on some cable, and it's like, oh, there goes the country's internet. The tricky part too is things like satellite-based internet can work, but it's just so capital intensive to launch that often it turns into like a duopoly. I mean, I think that's probably the end state. We've got Starlink. There will probably be, 1 or 2 other ones, but I don't think Joe Schmo is going to be launching a helium-powered like satellite or helium incentivized internet satellite anytime soon. I don't know. Helium might appreciate that, and maybe they're working on that long term. But I don't know.
It's tough. But I mean, even if you want you want lowest latency, right, for gaming, for blockchain apps, whatever. And I think satellites, I just don't know what it's going to take. I mean, you need like a laser beam to shoot up and shoot down, right? I mean, it's just, I'm not sure it'll ever get as low latency as we require. Who knows?
Yeah, we'll see.
Elon could be cooking.
Standing by.
Touch back on RWAs. I mean, for me, it's an interesting one because obviously I sort of feel like RWAs have been overpromised and completely underdelivered on chain. But as you sort of highlighted, I mean, delivery is an issue, like where you're going to cross-border issues. Like there's a lot of things that people don't realize. They're sort of saying, well, where's the property? Where's the commodity? Where's the equity, slice? And there's a regulatory, I think people can understand regulations one thing, but actual physical getting these things done is quite difficult. So no, I appreciate that. I mean, and I know the Aptos team, they haven't been silenced at all. They've been quite blatant, hinting that RWAs are coming later this year. And I agree with you. It's probably Forex. I mean, obviously I can't speak for those guys, but Forex makes the most sense.
I think it's definitely the logical first step. You sidestep a lot of these issues, like you said, of deliverability. And I think liquidity too. Just because I can mint an NFT that represents some New York hotel or New York apartment building, who wants to buy a fractionalized share of that? Is that market even going to be liquid? Like, sure, you can financialize it, but what's the benefit? So I don't know. I'm not sold on all of them. I think long term that blockchain technology is superior in terms of maintaining transparency and accessibility for these things. But for something that people are not already clamoring to get, I don't know if there's necessarily that same issue. But Forex and currency, these things trade hands every day. And when I was coming back from the airport, I remember the spread was like 20% on, I think, Hong Kong, Korea, like dollars. And that blew my mind. And I'm thinking that everyone else is probably upset about this. And it's really just a result of some kiosk just has a monopoly in the airport.
On that,
and you can easily solve this by both counterparties having a stable coin and then issuing it on chain. Like you need $50,000 of liquidity on an order book to get 10 or 15 basis points like conservatively. So I think that there's really no question that this is a logical first step. And I think something that like a problem is actually being solved. There is actually demand. And I think the rails too are there because a lot of emerging markets have like the everything consumer app that's your chat, it's your P2P payments, and maybe it's social media too. And a lot of these have crypto too. And a lot of them, a lot of these places, the countries or some of the larger financial institutions are investigating stable coins and the partnerships are being formed. So I think this is a really simple way to bring it on. I mean, even the United States, which has, I think, been very slow to pass like concrete legislation, is at least looking at stable coins right now because I think it understands the global importance of these things. So I'd like to see those on chain. I'd like to see every country on chain, and I'd like to see forex markets for every pair. Let a thousand flowers bloom because people want these and they don't want to be, screwed on the spread when they're paying remittances or when they're doing cross-border payments. It'll grease the wheels of commerce. It'll make it so people don't have to hold 10% or whatever in some bank. And when someone manufacturer in Japan wants to buy something from a Mexican plant, they do an atomic transaction. There's no T+2, T+5 if you need to hop across, 2 intermediate mega banks. It's just so much faster and so much easier. So yeah, let's bring Forex markets on chain and just make things easier for people.
Completely agree. One question I wanted to ask was, so I know there's Hippo Space, which sort of does the Jupyter style multi-hop aggregation. Is that the leading one at the moment? What's sort of happening on that front? Who should you be using if you want to do multi-hops on Aptos?
Yeah, in terms of aggregators, we've been working really closely with Panora, previously Swap GPT. They grew out of the Outlier Ventures Accelerator program that was actually partnering with Aptos Labs. And my co-founder, Kirsten, and I, we signed on to be mentors. And that's how we met Keshav and Shraddha, the co-founders of the project. And they've been building products on top of Econia, including an aggregator. So I'd certainly recommend people go check that out for the multi-hop swaps and everything.
Nice. Moving slightly to sort of Aptos Core, the nice thing about Aptos is they're moving fast, and I think they're taking the opportunity while the chain is sort of not as active or not as, the demand's not that high right now, but they really are pushing new features, and it's great to see. That was what Solana's popular for, but they've been forced to sort of slow down, with chain restarts and whatnot. Aptos is really capitalizing right now to push, and especially things like PreviewNet, that's super interesting, and getting validator operators on and contributing to that. Are you guys participating in that? How does that really work with the actual, your guys' side of things? And any interesting stats or that you could share if you have any?
Yeah. So the contributions to Aptos Core take different forms. I've personally authored a couple dozen pull requests into Aptos Core, whether it's things like multi-sig code or math utility helper functions. Often, if there's something that I want in the core libraries, and I'm pretty sure other developers will need it, I'll just write it myself and submit it as a community contribution. If it's more detailed, it'll involve things like an Aptos improvement proposal with a more formal write-up or specification. In terms of PreviewNet and benchmarking, we have been working with Aptos Labs on benchmarking the Aptos blockchain using Econia. And so we actually are just right now working on the article to lay this all out. But yeah, we tested Econia on one of the test clusters. I can't recall DevNet or testnet, but it was Econia, a single market, multiple market, like 10 markets, 100 markets, and we observed horizontal scaling across markets, the parallelism we would expect to see, some of the fastest numbers that have been benchmarked for our deck. So we're excited about that to put those numbers out. And what I appreciate is that Aptos is so benchmarking forward and testing forward, that there is this almost peer-reviewed, repeatable testing framework, and they pride themselves on that. And it's, I think, just part of this this flywheel effect they've set up of we're going to build this fast, and we're going to build this fast the right way. So it's exciting to participate in that meaningfully, and also as a open source contributor, be able to get the kinds of software functionality that's required to build outstanding programs on top of the platform.
Yeah, I think benchmarking is important. Obviously the industry's got different definitions of TPS, and it really plays havoc with sort of retail minds and Twitter kind of arguments and whatnot. And you're right, Aptos, a couple of other blockchains have kind of really put their foot in it, and we don't have to name names, but the Aptos team have kind of had a more kind of clean approach with that, and industry focus, trying to bring everyone together versus kind of create divisions. From your side, what are the key things that you think need to happen in Aptos' ecosystem to really get that flywheel going? Obviously, I think Econia is definitely a core component. As you say, you add the perps, the dexes, the kind of central limit clearing. What else kind of needs to happen in your mind? Yeah,
I think that there's a lot of marginal qualitative changes that just happen with general ecosystem growth. So more projects, more cross-pollination, more incubation, more investment into the space. But I also see that coming, which is exciting, especially from being in person. And investors are meeting with projects, and people are starting to do raises. There are a couple announced recently, like our friends at Merkle.
Yeah.
And so beyond that, I think some of the major qualitative shifts, I think that stablecoins, like native stablecoins, are an important part. I know that there's bridged versions, but people are typically a lot more comfortable with the native ones. And Circle and Tether at this point, due to their past successes, have just, I think, become kind of behemoths, and that they can be kind of slower to integrate. Like every new chain is an additional like internal security audit, and there has to be like a project manager to kind of own that. And after they write the code, deal with all the assorted, requests for information and et cetera. I do think that, this would actually be a really interesting opportunity for PayPal USDC to like get its foot in the door and maybe lead the charge. If anyone from PayPal is listening, I mean, if anyone from PayPal, Circle, or Tether is listening, deploy stablecoin on Aptos right now. But obviously, I think Circle and Tether know that people are clamoring for that. I think PayPal, though, they're an interesting use case because they're very like consumer and product oriented, and Aptos has made sure to include these things like keyless sign-on, authentication through zero knowledge proofs that involve maybe like your Google or X account or whatever. I think there's an interesting use case for PayPal to integrate in these kinds of ways and have that native stablecoin. Personally, I also think it's cool because its ticker is Pi USD, so to me it just looks like Python USD. But that's sort of a digression. Of course, I mean, any other stablecoin. It's not like I'm like an investor in PayPal or anything. I just think that these are like interesting market developments I'd like to see. Honestly, I think that whoever integrates first is going to take the vast share of it. I think that's kind of what happened with Circle on Solana. USDC has become kind of like the stable of the chain, and so I think that's a major qualitative improvement, especially because we were talking about Forex before. It's like it's a canonicalized stable. And so who knows? I mean, if even like the euro or maybe like Singaporean dollar or something came on first, like I don't know, is the drive of that enough to change people because it's canonical versus not? I think those are interesting questions, but it's probably still going to be denominated in USD backed stablecoins for a while, and I just hope to see a canonical one soon.
I think that's a great take. Actually, I quite enjoy that. I think you're right in that when it comes to a new ecosystem, it does give opportunities for a new player to kind of carve out and dominate the market. So I think that's a great one. Specifically to your business, maybe this is a hint to sort of ideas for other builders or interested in Aptos. Is there anything that your team just can't get to, or anything you think is worthy of other builders solving?
Yeah, I mean, every creative product on top of Econia that's like audited and run by reputable people, like I'll retweet the link till the sun goes down. Beyond that, I think that there are interesting use cases for maybe liquidity provisioning on Econia. So we've seen other ecosystems and projects do things like vault strategies for market making on an order book. I think that this is the sort of tech primitive that we at Econia Labs don't necessarily want to express an opinion on. Like ideal market making strategies, often these are prop trading algorithms, and if you publicize or open source yours, that you can instigate a disadvantage when contrasted with other firms who maybe are closed source and are like watching your algorithms. But there's still certain techniques that you can do to make sure that you can at least like earn yield as a retail liquidity provider on the order book. We've seen some projects like this on Solana also like hybridize liquidity in that, because a lot of retail, they want to provide liquidity passively, and an order book is active, and it's that simple. But again, it's not the kind of thing that we want to express an opinion on. And so we have projects who've expressed some interest in it, like who maybe come from like quantitative trading backgrounds, for example. And of course, if anyone has that, they can always reach out to me, and glad to talk to them and field all those questions. So that's the kind of thing I'd like to see. Just like more creativity. Obviously, spot trading and nailing that was like first order of business, and making sure the protocol could support that. So I think now that is humming along smoothly. Obviously, we are looking into enabling other core primitives, and like I mentioned earlier, we're working on like a consumer kind of facing product, and we're starting to look into hybrid liquidity provisioning strategies, and longer term, as we get our feet wet in this and kind of expand into potentially other verticals, want to make sure that these all play back to this central thesis of like the liquidity layer for Aptos DeFi.
makes sense. Moving to slightly more entertainment focused, what is your spiciest take?
Oh, I'm just not a big fan of L2s. It's like the sequencer thing, I don't know. If you run a blockchain with one node and you call it a blockchain, people will yell at you online because it's centralized and you're the devil. But you can run a blockchain with one node, but if you call it an L2, actually, like you can get a free pass
forget
on
about
that.
it. Yeah, forget about it.
Yeah. So I don't understand that.
Yeah.
It's like to me it's not distributed, it's not decentralized, and like people have been screwed when the sequencer has gone down before. Like this has happened, and the unfortunate part is that there's this like race to the bottom, and so every L2 can grab more market share by just like trying to decrease latency or like decrease the like cost to like publish a blob or whatever, and they're not going to gain anything by actually building a blockchain. And the wild part too is like at a certain point, I don't see the difference between just having a bridge. And like Aptos already has bridges, and so I don't know. I think that like maybe people just can like listen to some of the things Anatoly Yakovenko said, because I know he kind of rails on some of these similar design principles. I mean I think that just for like my use case, which is building like DeFi primitives, like I want atomic settlement in the fastest L1 possible, and that's only going to happen on like a monolithic chain. I guess that like there could be certain cases where like gaming, I think is a good case, which it's like if you have is like an in-game asset that's changing hands a bunch of times and you only need to settle at the end of the day, then like it makes sense to run it on an L2, but then it also just makes sense to run it on an AWS instance because you're like Blizzard Entertainment or whatever. So like I get these isolated state channels that publish on chain for like reconciliation, but as far as actual like intercomposable state machine, just like use like a sufficiently decentralized number of nodes, whatever that is. I don't know. I mean, BNB maybe not enough. Aptos Solana probably good enough, and then just make it as fast as you can. I don't know. That's my hot take.
You don't have to convince me. I'm completely the same. I mean, L2s are just I don't even want to waste my time with them, to be honest. This one you can choose, so alpha drop or prediction.
As far as predictions goes, like I just generally predict that more developers will continue building on Aptos and the ecosystem will grow because it offers superior technology. Like I don't really care to like, read the tea leaves of the market vicissitudes. I think that I've been kind of like made stubbornly brazen by the virtue of having been building in this ecosystem for 2 years amidst, red charts, if you want to just call it that. Yeah. And I'm like, look, I'm here because I see that this technology is superior, and I really just don't want to like talk about the other things. And so, my long-term prediction is that Aptos is the next version of cloud compute, and the chain is fast, so people are going to build on it.
Yeah. And it takes forging in the fire, right? Which is kind of the 2 years of red, as you say, to kind of get that core building out. Okay, last one. If you're not thinking about block STM, what are you probably doing?
Oh, yeah. All right. So, personal life, like I mean, almost every morning, like I did this morning before getting on, like I'm either lifting weights or at the gym or like doing hot yoga. I'm plant-based, and Portland's got like dozens of vegan restaurants, so I always like to check those out. I'm in an ultimate frisbee league.
No way.
I have two friends.
That's good. Two
of my friends and I, we have a pact where once a month we have to jump in a natural body of water. And in the summer it's fun, like we go hang out at a river, like whatever. But in the winter it's like, haha, I watched you jump in and you screamed like a little girl and you jumped out. Then snowboarding, surfing. I mean, all of these, like not as maybe as much as I'd like it, because I just like, I work really hard at Econia Labs, and the product is and everything is very important to me. But obviously, like it's important to have balance and fit these things in when I can, and love to do all those things.
Agreed. No, thanks. That's some good color. I think pretty much ready to wrap. Thanks so much for your time. I think we covered a lot of interesting topics, a lot of Econia and Aptos, and I think listeners hopefully can be a bit more sort of enlightened as to around what makes Aptos special. You kind of see these headlines, block STM, but how does it actually come through practically, which is kind of key, and how is it different to kind of the blockchains that we all know and love already. And yeah, I look forward to seeing Econia's growth in the months ahead.
Thank you for having me, for all of that, for the well thought out leading tech questions. It's very easy for me to start rant about all this stuff, but I think you've really squeezed out even more rants than I think normally. So I appreciate that, and certainly having another interlocutor who can understands these things and has worked with data, understands database theory, all these different considerations. Appreciate all your expertise of the Solana runtime and parallelism just in general. So it's been exciting, and I again really grateful for the opportunity. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome, thanks.